happened. This event happened. This controversial event happened right after the last podcast with Nolan Bushnell being invited to GDC this year to be presented with a lifetime achievement award, and there was a lot of backlash to that. There was a hashtag saying not Nolan because they didn't want in this environment Nolan Bushnell to be given any sort of recognition at GDC, especially in the climate we are right now with the sexual misconduct and harassment issues in Hollywood, the Me Too hashtag movement, and everyone in Hollywood being outed as pieces of trash. So on the back of that, this is coming into the gaming environment with Nolan Bushnell. So they invited him in there, the Game Developers Conference, that they would give his annual Pioneer Award to. He was the co-founder, Bushnell, who was there from the beginning with Pong. And then he helped with the 2600. He sold it to Warner in 76. They got the money. The 2600 comes out as the VCS in 77. Helps revolutionize the home console market. Atari becomes a big name. Now they're garbage, but before they were great. The whole point is this, though. Bushnell had a lot to do with that, running that company well in the first 5 or 6 years before he stepped aside. He also did Chuck E. Cheese when it was Showtime Theater?
Showtime Pizza.
Showtime Pizza. So he's done a lot for the industry. And he's worthy of getting a video game developer award lifetime achievement. I think not many people would argue that, sensibly would argue that. So the argument against him receiving this award, though, became people looking back at the past of Atari and their working environment. And it's famous. I mean, we knew it. Like one of the most famous, whenever you see Nolan Bushnell announced for any sort of conference or past expos, they would use a picture of him in a hot tub with a cigar.
Sure.
Like that's an image in your head. And that's what people came to associate Atari with in the 70s environment, was their sort of free-loving 70s era work environment where it's like, oh, we have parties, free sex and free love. And a lot of that came from Bushnell himself talking about that over the years and him explaining this is how it was back then, not being ashamed of it, just this is how we did business. So that became an outcry in the environment saying, well, maybe that's not proper for this point in time for him to be a representative at GDC to receive this Pioneer Award. Maybe this isn't the right time for that. At least that's what I saw. So Nolan put out a statement saying he basically understood. And he said that he did a statement here. I do not think exploiting these kinds of issues through a finite 40-year-old prism offers a productive reflection of our company. Instead, I would refer you to the thoughts and comments of the scores of former employees. That's when Kotaku asked him to comment. But he basically before that put out a pretty sensible statement. It's like, if you don't
along the same lines.
If you don't want to honor me, I totally understand. We're at a different space and time right now, and it is what it is. And so Kotaku mentioned an article, put out an article. This is one of the best articles I've ever read on Kotaku.
This was done by Cecilia
de Anastasia.
Cecilia de Anastasia. She also did an interesting article on the Wii U's afterlife.
So this article is called Sex, Pong, and Pioneers, What Atari Was Really Like, according to women who were there. And she reached out and interviewed, I think, at least a dozen women that worked at Atari in the 70s, which is very fascinating. So you have people who worked back then, people who started off very young, people that worked their way up different, some people were making minimum wage or close to it, other people were in different aspects, and they commented on a lot of stuff. They talked about the environment, they talked about the hot tub. It was every other day men only hot tub, women, and then Friday
co-ed.
Friday co-ed. They said, yeah, people dated freely. People asked you to date, and some coworkers dated. Some people didn't. There was a little allegations in here that maybe some Atari employees were participated in a porno, perhaps in the 70s.
Right.
So that's how Atari was in the free-loving California 70s.
Right.
So what's interesting about this story to me, though, is that she reached out, because a lot of times when you hear people getting upset for others, you don't hear from the original people associated with these stories. They don't comment. Here you have a chance for the women to comment on it. And some seemed like, they're like, yeah, for the time, it was what it was. I was comfortable with it. One woman said she wasn't comfortable with some of it. You have a range of people. One woman said she helped design the hot tub area, which I thought was pretty funny. It's like, hey, I helped design the hot tub area.
One helped design the hot tub area. One helped design the volleyball court.
Yeah, they played volleyball.
When they were moving.
One really said that there was sexual objectification, but it was by both men and women that were doing it.
That's actually something I wanted to touch on too.
So when you're looking back, what Nolan Bushnell was referring to, like the prism of the time, he to his credit, he sort of understands that, yeah, maybe in this environment I'm not comfortable with people giving me an award, but that, to me at least personally, I of course you have to honor the man's achievements. We wouldn't potentially be where we are in the industry without him. But this is a very complex issue. I implore everyone to read this article at Kotaku. I feel like I'm rambling. I don't think I'm trying to tiptoe in a minefield here, but this guy did a lot for the industry, and I don't think this is a black and white issue at all. And I'll turn it over to you, and we'll see where.
Well, I don't think it's black and white either. I don't necessarily disagree with GDC maybe not wanting to give them the award right now. I don't know that.
I think GDC looks stupid for not realizing they could have had a backlash to this stuff, or not realizing this existed.
Oh, sure. I think maybe it should have been thought through prior to announcement and then cancellation. But I understand not wanting to bring to light this sort of workspace in an era where we're trying to get to the point where workspaces are more professional, where people feel more comfortable. That said, I don't necessarily know that in this microcosm instance, it was necessarily all bad.
You want me to say this quote right here?
Which quote?
This is from Lonnie Reeder, who worked at Atari for 2 years and co-founded a company with Bushnell. She said, "It's drive-by assassination. I think there's an element of telephone being played. Every day was not a wet t-shirt contest. There's a collective anger amongst us toward the individuals who made this a big deal." So she's referring to those at Atari from back then, are saying, what the fuck are you talking about? You're being way more offended than we were potentially when we worked there.
Problem is with that is, if you're going to rest on stories of hot tubs and decadence, and that's what you're going to constantly push out, promote, and talk about to make working at a place look cool for so long, it's going to be blown way out of proportion, even if
absolutely.
That's not what it is.
Like I said, that Bushnell picture...
I don't have a whole lot of sympathy for the image being blown out of proportion if you purposely blow that image out of proportion yourself.
But is it fair to conflate that with your achievements and to denigrate potentially your achievements and to say, like, well, this guy was horrible? And it's like, well, from what I see from the stories from a dozen people, it's like, well, Nolan didn't seem like he did anything really, nothing illegal from what it seems like at the time. It's just like, if you were transported now, 2018, back then, you'd be like, what the fuck is this? But that was everywhere, though. And that's not to excuse it all. But I'm just watching. It's funny. I got back into Mad Men recently.
Right.
And that's half of the plots is like people of other races and women being shit upon in the 60s in New York City. Right. Because that's how it was. But it seems like for the time, though, Atari was very, very progressive.
No, it does. And that is true. It really, you have to think about the time, think about their mindset, and what level men and women considered themselves on within any sort of development community. But GDC is not only about game development and conference, but also it's actively involved in trying to improve the workplace for women, for minorities. This is not necessarily what we're fighting against now, but it's easy to conflate those two. And then also, I'm not trying to say anything about Nolan Bushnell's achievements. He deserves some recognition for them, but that would have been a weird venue to do it. Look, this is how I have to kind of put this, because they even said, the ladies even say that, this was empowering, for a lot of them, because, y'all get together. This is a club. This is a starting business, and everyone can probably throw jokes, take shots at each other. Anyone who worked in the restaurant industry can probably read this article and go, holy shit, I worked in that environment.
Sure. Freewheeling, sex happening behind the cheeses that are in the corner.
Yeah, smoking blunts behind the dumpster, having sex in the fucking storage rooms. I mean, this is the sort of stuff that does occur in certain business places, and a lot of people...
It fosters it more.
It fosters it. And...
Yeah.
You know, from where I was in a restaurant, a certain one, for like 3 of the 7 years I was there, that's just how it ran. And the objectification that, you know, you mentioned earlier about this going both ways, it was very much how it worked at the restaurants. The women objectified the men, and the men objectified the women, and everyone went out to drink at night and fucked, and everyone was fine and friends the next morning.
Sure.
But that's not... But just because you can have that
you don't want to put that on Front Street at GDC. That's basically what they want to do.
Yeah, and just because you can have that sort of workplace, it doesn't mean that that's exactly the sort of workplace. Just because you can see that happen at a place like Atari or at a restaurant and have it work well enough, there's 2 things. One, you don't necessarily want that to be... You don't want that to be a workspace everywhere. And 2, what you're not seeing and what she touches on in this article, but I can also touch on is, while there were lots of people who had fun, men and women, I know lots of women who dominated the floor at various restaurants.
Oh, sure.
Both in terms of sexually and you know, just presence wise, and it was great.
They're the queen bees of the waiter world.
And they would slap around the cooks, and I mean, it was great. But, you know, it also... I could present you, if asked, and put on the spot.
There were people that didn't like it.
Right. Well, you know, hey, give me some examples of people I could talk to about, you know, your time at working at XXXXX.
Sure.
And I could think of all my friends and present them, and they'd be like, yeah, there was some bad times, there was some good times, but overall it was a really fun experience. But, you know, sure, there was some sexual harassment, and it may have been...
Oh, sure.
Right. Okay, so there's that. But those people are my friends, and I can present them to you because they're already pretty okay with the situation. What we're not hearing are the people who quit the restaurant I worked at after a month because they didn't like that, you know, because they couldn't... They never got to fit in with the gang. There's probably people at Atari, women at Atari, who hated that.
Absolutely.
That lifestyle.
But in that time, though, that was the norm. So it's, if you worked at any corporation for the most part, again, go back to Man Man, you had the ass slapping, the secretary culture and stuff. So that was almost, it sounds like, they talked to some of them that said, like, it was worse at other places that they worked at.
No,
they come to Atari and it was better.
She did say that. She said, no, she said after she left Atari, she almost quit one of her jobs, and when asked, she was like, well, where I come from, they were nice, and, you know, where I'm at now, you guys are mean.
So the argument, I have 2 arguments here. And there's one great little anecdote from a French girl named Muriel Chevalier who went there, and she was only, she came from Paris. And then she came and she said, this was great. I got promoted quickly. Said it was quite different from the companies she was used to working with in France as well. She said the clients that she's worked with, they're very chauvinistic. But there she said, I went from assistant to credit manager at Atari. And after 3 months, she was the division's director. She got put up the chain. And so it sounds like that's what Atari was like, equal opportunity. It's like, yeah, this is the 70s, free love, feminist movement, and kicked in high gear. And this is what it was. So again, GDC either should have done their homework better, in my opinion, because they pretty much put Bushnell in a situation to be embarrassed. He didn't need to be. He absolutely did not need to be.
Right. That I can agree. I mean, the whole situation could have been avoided.
Absolutely. And so while there's still elements of bad behavior still in workplaces today, absolutely, I think... Yeah, I know. It's like I said, it's very strange. I understand it's up to GDC whether or not they want to rescind any sort of award to someone. But I hope this doesn't now carry with Bushnell for the rest of his life, where now if people bring him up, it's like, well, there was some bad shit going on at Atari in the 70s. And it's like, all right, that's what his legacy is going to be now, is that, you know, you hope not.
I don't think that's going to be his legacy. I mean, my final statements on this would be, I understand in the current environment, GDC perhaps not wanting to bring light to the sort of workplace that they are in these days, it could look similar, but is probably very different actually than what it was back then. 2, I think Bushnell deserves to be acknowledged for his achievements, but I don't know. As much as I can talk about time in restaurants, as much as these people probably really enjoyed their time at Atari, I also have a real tough time, like personally lately, but I don't think that these are necessarily things that should be glorified because of their ability to go wrong in so many situations.
Absolutely, but that's not why GDC was going to honor the guy. They weren't going to say, well, we honor you because you had an Atari-themed hot tub. That's not why he was going to be honored.
No, but I'm just saying that would have come out, and perhaps they didn't want that stuff to come out.
I was going to leave it with this. Compared to, it sounds like from these women's stories and from everyone else, it sounds like Atari was a lot more progressive than other places at the time.
Absolutely.
We talk about Centipede and Donna Bailey, recognized as one of the first major female game developers. That's Atari
she was
as well.
Like the only female programmer at Atari during that time.
But for the most part, though, that's better than other places that were around.
Yeah.
You know?
No, there was progression. I'm not saying that there wasn't. And I honestly, I think that, from these stories that were told, that this was probably a lot milder than people make it out to be. But, I mean, that also goes back to kind of one of my original statements, which is, if you're going to play it up like a certain thing, then
now you can't do it anymore.
Well, yeah. And if you're going to play it up like X, then you better expect for you to get the backlash of playing it up like X, even if it wasn't like that all the time. Like the quote that we read at the beginning where they think it was a drive-by assassination and it wasn't a wet t-shirt contest every day. Well, if it wasn't, then it shouldn't be talked about as such.
Sure, but I think in the past when you talked about it 10 years ago versus now, it's a different climate. So it's not like I don't think Bushnell, knowing what's going on now, would go out and say the same thing that he said 10 years ago or 8 years ago or 20 years ago.
2012, he was talking about stacked secretaries.
But even that's a different environment to where we are now.
Fair enough.
6 years later. So, all right. I don't think did I ever meet Nolan Bushnell? I don't know. He seems all right, by me. But like I said, I just hope this doesn't follow him for the rest of his life now versus what he actually achieved. So
I think this is a fairly mild story, all things. Yeah, this is a great article, though. I mean, it's really straight down the middle, both sides.